with the launch of the 5080 just over a week away, and lots of leaks and rumours about performance, particularly with the 5090, but not so much the 5080. All we've had to go on so far is this chart here and a previous chart that was actually removed for some reason, and I could speculate why. But all we have at the moment to go on is what looks like a 15% performance increase, 20% or so for the 5070 Ti, and around 33% for the 5090. So what I thought I would do in this video is to take a look at the raw numbers and get a proper sense of what we can expect from the 5080 in terms of actual performance numbers. And I think it's important to think about what kinds of gains we might get in terms of raw raster performance, which is what most people care about most. What will happen with standard kind of light RT games like Resident Evil 4 Remake, and the more heavy ray trace games like Cyberpunk 2077 and Alan Wake 2, both of which allow for traditional ray tracing to a high degree. So we've got things like high RT, Psycho mode in Cyberpunk, and we've got ray tracing in Alan Wake 2 before you switch on path tracing. But both games allow for really heavy duty ray tracing, or more accurately path tracing, which is a different technique, a more heavy duty technique. So I have the numbers here, and we have full specs published, and NVIDIA have given us most of the numbers for the 50 series. Now, they haven't given us raw benchmark numbers with proper percentages, etc., that we could really judge its performance on. And interestingly, if you go down and look at shader cores, we'll notice that across the board all it says is Blackwell. Okay, it's supposedly a new architecture. It is and it isn't a new architecture. There are maybe some improvements, but by and large, when it comes to shader cores, there's really not much of a difference between 5080 and 4080/4080 Super. If we scroll down here, you'll notice that we actually do have teraflop scores for shader cores. Okay, so you'll notice that the 4080 has 49 teraflops versus 52 on the 4080. Okay, which suggests around a 6% uptick in pure shader / raster performance. In reality, it's probably more like 3%. For whatever reason, it didn't quite seem to hit that 6% in most games. It tended to be around 3%. So we do have other numbers to do with ray tracing and tensor cores. So RT/PT for path tracing, and the AI tops as well. I think that's trillion operations per second. So what we can do is do some calculations based on the number of cores and the frequency. Now, if you're interested, I will put a link in the description to another video here from Frame Chasers, which does a good job, I think, of explaining why, basically what kind of performance increase we can expect from the likes of the 5080. Okay, and he's basing this based on the SMs, the streaming multiprocessors, and he's coming up with 5% faster. And to be fair, I think he suggests it could be a little bit more than that, but certainly not much more than that. Okay, so I'll put that that link in the description. You can go and take a look at that. When I saw it first, I was thinking, I was kind of maybe drinking the NVIDIA Kool-Aid a bit too much, and I was thinking, maybe this is kind of back of the napkin type calculation stuff. But the more I thought about it and the more I looked into it, the more I realized that actually he's probably pretty spot on. So my own calculations are pretty much the same with additional calculations on top. So this is what we have been given. I was searching for the original ones because the original slides that NVIDIA showed basically at the launch showed a much larger increase in other games compared to RE4 and Horizon Forbidden West. Okay, so Horizon Forbidden West doesn't have RT. RE4 does have RT, but it's pretty light RT. Okay, that there won't be a huge difference, let's say, between NVIDIA and AMD graphics cards in the same tier of performance in that game. Okay, there's not much, because as a percentage of the render workload per frame, ray tracing isn't a high percentage of that workload. So there isn't much room for NVIDIA to make gains in terms of RT in that particular title. If you look at this, again, another video that I linked to here by Vex did have those slides. Okay, so you can see here. Okay, so we can see here that on the 5070 it's more like 20% rather than 15% compared to the 5080. But we can see up here doing the pixel counting that we were looking at sort of 30 to 40%. And for whatever reason, you could speculate why, these have been since removed. Now Far Cry 6, again, it's not the heaviest RT workload. A Plague Tale Requiem, I think it's just shadows or something in that game that uses RT. So again, it's not a huge RT workload. So I'm not saying that there's any shenanigans going on, but it is a little bit suspicious that these slides were removed and replaced with these ones that showed much more modest gains in performance. Okay, so let's go through the calculations. The 4080 has 9,728 shader cores, okay, or CUDA cores. The 4080 Super increased that by 5%. Okay, and in some games you did get the full 5%, but in others you were getting maybe 2-3% or even 0% in some cases. It didn't seem to translate into raw performance in game. And then the 5080 has a further 5% on top of the 4080 Super. As I said, for the previous generations, or the previous generation, the teraflops for shader performance are listed. Not so for the 5080, because obviously you could extrapolate performance from that and make fairly accurate predictions about frame rates and so on, versus the previous generation. So the 5080 has plus 5% shaders over the 4080 Super and 10.5% over the 4080. Okay, so in their slides they use the 4080, not the 5080. That 10.5%, of course, is not 15%, so where is the other 4.5% coming from that they list? And of course, in one of the games we have RT and one we don't. Okay, so obviously each game is different. There may be something in the architecture that improves performance just beyond raw shader core performance. So there may be something in the architectural tweaks here and there that have gotten a little bit more performance depending on the game. We just don't know at this stage. So 10.5% improvement and only 5% over the 4070 Super. Okay, so that's our kind of base to work from. When we look at RT cores, the 4080 has 113. I'm not going to give the actual numbers of RT cores. They give us the raw performance. So 113 ray tracing teraflops is what the 4080 has. 4080 Super has 121, plus 7% over the 4080, the OG 4080. And then the 5080 is listed as having 171 ray tracing teraflops. That's about 50% over the 4080 and about 40% over the 4080 Super. Okay, so it's significant improvements, But what you have to remember is that's not going to translate into 50% more frames in a game that uses RT, because ray tracing is only going to be, in many cases, a small percentage of the overall workload. So let's say 10% of the workload was for ray tracing, then you're going to get that 10% improvement in 90% of the workload, and you might get a 50% improvement in 10% of the workload, and you may end up with 12 or 13% overall improvement or something like that. Okay, so while the extra performance in ray tracing of course is welcome, and in those games that use ray tracing more heavily, I would expect to see more gains in those games over the 40 series. When it comes to AI, or the tensor cores, very, very significant improvements here, and we know this from the presentations that this is where NVIDIA have put their efforts. The node, the 4N node from TSMC, is the same node as the 40 series. There's no improvement there. So the concentration of transistors and so on is going to be the same. There's no generational leap from that perspective. But obviously, NVIDIA were able to improve the tensor cores. Okay, I mean, shader cores are very, very simplified little CPUs. There's probably not an awful lot of scope for improvement there, because standard shader cores have been going for generations. So any improvement within the same node is going to be very marginal at best. Whereas it does appear that NVIDIA do have room to maneuver when it comes to ray tracing, certain improvements to the architecture at a very low level that they can make. So they have made significant gains here. And with the 4080, we're looking at 780 TOPS, a 7% improvement for the 4080 Super over that, and a 131, so 1.31 times extra on top for the 4080, and plus 115% for the 4080 Super. So in both cases, a good bit more than double the AI performance. Now, what does that mean? Obviously, if you're working pure AI workloads, great, massive improvements there, and that's shown in the charts. So if we look at the charts, we see here in generative AI with flux.dev. Okay, Flux has some tools like image generation and so on, and we can see there's more than a double performance. So that does scale to that chart. It looks like around that 130% improvement in performance, so about 2.3. That looks about right. Okay. So coming back here, what does that mean for gaming though? And it actually does mean something for gaming, because in moving from a CNN model to a transformer model for DLSS 4, going back to the Digital Foundry interview recently with their head of AI research on the graphics side, there is a 4 times increase in computation time for that new transformer model upscaling. Okay, so the massive improvements in AI performance on the 50 series can absorb that and result in maybe a millisecond or 2 extra per frame here and there. Whereas when using the transformer model, and I'm guessing there'll be a choice, you'll be able to switch between CNN and transformer model. It could add a little bit more. There could be just that extra 2 or 3 milliseconds per frame compared to the 50 series. So I'm guessing there will be additional performance when you're upscaling. So you switch on your quality upscaling, maybe you have 10% without upscaling, more performance, and then you upscale, and now you're getting your 12, 13, maybe 15% improvement. So a lot of the numbers there could be explained by these little marginal improvements here and there. And we are talking about marginal improvements where we're talking about, they know the limits of the hardware. This particular node has been reached. There's not much there for them. So they're working on the margins and they're getting 1% here and 2% there. And that's basically the best they can do. Add more cores to get you that extra 5 to 10% performance, and then work around the margins of AI and RT and so on, depending on the game, depending on whether you are upscaling or not. Then you see better gains. Then you're hitting the 15, maybe even 20% or so in some games, depends. On the clock speeds, again, there is a slight improvement here. It's marginal again, plus 2 to 4%, or even 0% in some cases, depending on whether you're boosting up or not. And this can come down to things like, how is good is the 50 series at sustaining boost clocks and all that kind of stuff, versus the 40 series, whether you're getting that percentage improvement all the time or only some of the time. It depends, but we can kind of estimate that, you're talking about versus the 4080 Super, you're talking about a 0 to 2% improvement depending on what the workload is, how sustained it is, and so on, and versus the original 4080, 2 to 4%. Okay, so that's how you're starting to get, extra cores plus extra frequency, helped with the extra 40 watts power. Okay, the TDP is 360 watts versus 320 on the 4080 and 4080 Super. So there's that extra 40 watts to kind of push the clocks a little bit more, for example. Obviously they need it to power more cores, but maybe there's a little bit of extra headroom as well to push the clocks up a little bit as well. So it's, again, we're on the margins here. We're getting a little bit here and a little bit there. So when you look at the total, ignoring RT and AI for now, just pure raster performance with shaders and clock speeds and so on, I reckon, based on my calculations, we're looking at around 7% improvement for the 5080 versus 4080 Super, and 13% or thereabouts 5080 versus 4080. That's, I'd be reasonably confident that that's where we're going to land, somewhere in and around there. Maybe 1% or 2% either side, but I'd be surprised if it was much different than this. Certainly those original, I think there's something wrong there. I think either someone did the chart wrong, or I'm not even going to speculate on whether there's anything more kind of sinister going on than just maybe a mistake. Or look, it could be right, it could be that in those games, I don't know, but to me it just doesn't seem to add up to me, because I don't think the RT workload in those is particularly high, and I don't see the extra gains there from that, unless there's some magic going on or something that I don't know about that goes beyond the bounds of physical hardware. I don't know. Okay, let's talk about ray tracing performance. Okay, the example I'm going to look at here is initially is the RE4 remake. Okay, Resident Evil 4, because there's a very light RT workload in that. The difference between AMD and NVIDIA, you can use AMD as kind of your yardstick for the workload. You can compare AMD on one side, NVIDIA on the other. If there's very little difference compared to a normal raster, then you know that the RT workload is not that much. But if NVIDIA, when you turn on RT, starts going up a lot, then you know that the RT workload has gone up a lot, because AMD basically kind of can't handle the RT workload in the way that NVIDIA does. So if you see big gains for NVIDIA, you know that as NVIDIA gains go up, the RT workload has gone up as well. So the way that you could you can't really work it out unless you actually can go in and actually profile a game, and what you're profiling for, you know what parts of the render pipeline are related to RT and how much of the percentages are for RT and so on. Other than that, all you can do is guesstimate. So what would the performance be like, or the performance gains be like in games that feature RT? Okay, if you're into your eye candy, which I am, you want to put it on your big OLED TV and you want all the eye candy turned on. What can you expect? You can expect the original raster gains in whatever percentage is just pure rasterization. So, like I said before, let's say in this game when you turn on RT, 90% of the workload is still your standard rasterization. Then obviously you're getting your 5-10% gains on that side of it. And then you're getting your RT gains, which are, let's say for the 4080 original, plus 51% versus the 5080 versus 4080. So let's say, let's take the clocks into account and everything. You might have a 13% raster improvement. Maybe not. Maybe it's only going to be 10%. Maybe it doesn't scale the way that the 4080 Super didn't quite scale over the 4080. Who knows? So let's say that we're around 13% raster improvement and that there's only a small workload. It's only 10%, whatever it is, but you are multiplying, you are getting a 51% improvement in that performance. I'm going to guesstimate. I'm picking a figure out of the air. You know, I'm not too bad at doing that kind of thing. So I'm just going to say it's 2%. Okay, that's what I would have picked without even looking at the chart. It just so happens that I now have 13% raster improvement. I'm getting another 2% from the RT, and I'm getting to 15%. We go back to the chart. What have we got in Resident Evil 4? 15% when you do the pixel counting. Okay, so that does make sense. That does add up to me. Okay, but what it does suggest is that, and I don't know if Horizon Forbidden West is an outlier. My suspicion is that most games would be a little bit less than this with the RT. I'm guessing, because this says DLSS, I think they're using DLSS 3 for this, so actually it doesn't quite add up that they were making gains from that, because I don't think with DLSS 3 they would have switched on a transformer model and had the 50 series gain another couple of percent that way over the 40 series. So I'm not quite sure. Again, game to game variance, it's going to be some percentage in some games and a higher percentage in other games, and it might average out at 13% in rasterization. So we just don't know. They might be cherry picking. Maybe this is the best example they found of pure rasterization performance. So back here, this is where I'm thinking. I'm thinking 15% in a lot of RT games where the workload is fairly low. So you're looking at games like Indiana Jones without the path tracing turned on, Silent Hill 2 with a bit of RT turned on, RE4 Remake, a bit of RT turned on. That's where you're getting your 15% in those games. Over the 4080 Super, we're only looking at about 9%. Okay, 9, maybe 10%, because the difference between the 4080 and the 4080 Super isn't particularly great. So it could be 10, it could even be 11%, but it'll be a little bit less than this. Okay. Now let's move on to path trace games. So Indiana Jones turned up to the max, Cyberpunk 2077 turned up to the max, Alan Wake 2 turned up to the max, all the eye candy. So we look at Alan Wake 2, and so we've got our 13% raster performance, but now we've got a bigger percentage of the render workload dedicated to path tracing. Okay, we're sending out all these rays, we're having all this bouncing, etc. Very, very expensive operations. So I'm doing, no, this is me going to my kind of back of the envelope type calculations. I'm looking at the difference between the 3090, which has 69 ray tracing flops, or teraflops, versus the 4080 with its 113. Okay, I can't remember if these are T-flops or just flops. But it's 113 versus 69, okay, which is, you know, a little bit more than 50% extra. So it's 50 to 60% higher RT performance on the 4080 compared to the 3090. So on Tech Power Up, they did a nice Alan Wake performance review, and if we look at normal rasterization performance, we have no RT switched on. 4080, we're going to use 1440p. 4080, 93.3, 3090, 73. Okay, it's about a 28% difference. Okay, so plus 28 for the 4080 when there's no RT turned on. With path tracing, we now have 4080 at 45.7, we have 3090 at 31. The difference there is 47%. So it went from 28 up to 47%, nearly plus 20% extra performance. Okay. When you have about 55-60% extra RT cores / RT teraflop performance. Okay. So I'm using that again. It's impossible to tell exactly. All you can do is kind of estimate. So I'm basing on that kind of a generational improvement in RT performance from 30 series to 40 series. I can see typical gains in heavy duty path trace games of 20 to 30%. That's what I reckon. Okay, so it could be, in that case it was plus an extra 20%. That seems a bit much. It could be as high as that, which would give you sort of 33% improvement. But I think in most cases it'll be sort of 20 to 30% when you switch on path tracing, 5080 versus 4080. Okay, slightly lower for the 4080 Super, but not much lower. So that covers where I think the performance will be. I've covered the NVIDIA disappearing chart. Okay, and you can look at the VEX video for more information on that. I will link in the description. So very quickly, I just want to touch on a couple of more things before this video gets too long. I want to kind of cap it around 30 minutes. I want to talk about multi-frame generation. So, okay, those gains based on whether you can actually get the 5080 for a reasonable price. If you can't, then those performance gains could be wiped out in some cases, unless you're really going after path tracing, and even then the price to performance might be there if you can't get a card at a reasonable price. So one of the selling points is multi-frame generation. Okay, I'm not going to go into that, what it is. I'm sure if you're watching this video, you may already have seen other videos on what it is. But basically it'll multiply one frame by up to 4. Okay, so you have one frame, you insert 3 frames before you output the next frame. Okay, so one frame becomes 4 frames, and you can do 3 frames, you can do 2 frames, like you can with the 40 series as well. But what that means is, if you're running a typical screen, okay, I think most gamers these days, most serious gamers are in the 120 to 165 hertz range. So I have 2 4K displays that I use. I have a 65-inch OLED TV, a Samsung, that can output at 144 hertz. Okay, fantastic screen, great for gaming when you turn on game mode. But it's topping out at 144 frames a second. Okay, and you probably put it down to maybe 140, 142 to avoid hitting that limit. And I've got an IPS monitor as well, a desk monitor, a 28-inch one, and that's 144 hertz as well. Multiplying my frames by 4 to hit 144 hertz is obviously 36 frames per second. The latency on that is going to be terrible. Okay. When I tune the FPS in a game, I'm looking to tune it to about 60 plus. Okay, that's where I start turning on frame generation. I might get away with 50. It depends on the PC latency. I'll turn on the NVIDIA monitoring, performance monitoring on screen, the overlay, and I'll look at the PC latency, and if it's 50 or less, or at a touch, maybe 55 is tolerable. If it's going over that, if it's 60 plus milliseconds, then that's just it's not a good enough experience for me or most people. I am fairly tolerant, I'm fine with 50, 45, that's no problem. But once it starts hitting 70, 80, 90, it's feeling very it's like steering a boat at that point. So multiplying 36 frames by 4 to get to 144 is not viable. What is viable is trying to hit 60 to 70. Okay, so the sweet spot, of course, would be 70. Turn on your frame generation, get it up towards the 144 hertz. So I don't see any scenario for now, unless I upgrade to a 240 hertz monitor. And TVs with 240 hertz, I'm sure they're not too far away. Maybe you can get one now. They're going to be expensive. They're not going to be widely available for a while. No, monitors, 4K monitors, 240 hertz, that is a thing at the moment. The HDMI outputs, I think, can handle that now on the 50 series, 4K 240. So it is viable, definitely. Obviously, a 500 hertz 1080p monitor, it becomes an option then as well. But for 4K screens, 144 hertz, you're going to be looking at 60 to 70 frames per second. So for me, and for most people, I think, MFG is not going to be a selling point for the foreseeable future. Maybe in 3 or 4 years, it's something viable in terms of upgrading my TV or whatever. Not that I even see the point in it, because it feels very smooth. I'm sure if I had a 240, 500 hertz TV, I would notice the difference, and maybe it would be night and day, but I'm quite happy with what I have. So MFG for me, not really a selling point for the vast majority of people. Another point I wanted to make, okay, and where are we at? Oh, we're about 33 minutes, but what the hell, you can either go the full road with me, or you can cut it short whenever you want. 4080 Super availability. In America, in the US market, you can get it, but it's horrendously expensive. Way over, it's way over the MSRP. I've seen other YouTube videos. I can't remember the YouTuber who did it. I'll put a link in the description to it. But he went into a micro center, and the shelves were virtually empty. No 40 series cards available. So there's a huge shortage of 40 series cards in the US, but not so in the EU. Okay, you go to Computer Universe, and you have plenty of options for 4080 Supers below MSRP. MSRP would be about €1,200. I just bought in the last few days a 4080 Super for €1,079 off this website. That's the equivalent of a $900 MSRP. If the 5080, now I do plan to get a 5080 anyway. Okay, I've got two high-end computers. One is for a desk-based one for productivity. The other is my all the bells and whistles turned on, eye candy, 65-inch OLED TV in the living room. Okay. If I get the 5080, if I can get my hands on one, even with all the modest gains, and even if it's a bit expensive, I'll still get one, because I am a lecturer in video game development. I teach on things like graphics. I research in virtual reality. That's where my PhD is. It's in virtual reality. It's in that kind of stuff. It's in game development. So I want a 5080. I want to play around with all the bells and whistles. When NVIDIA come up with all their tech demos, when Portal is updated, or Half-Life is updated with all the new tech, neural rendering and all that, the mega geometry. I want to try all that out because I need to know about it for my job. Okay, I teach about this stuff, I research in the area. I want access to the best technology, even if it's as a gamer, it wouldn't make much sense maybe to upgrade, because I have a 4080 Super, but I have two PCs. I've got like a 3060 Ti and a 4070 Ti at the moment, and I'm just looking to upgrade. So it's strange, and I'm only purely speculating now. One possibility is that because of Donald Trump's threats of tariffs, they may have stockpiled 50 series cards in the US. Okay. They may be starving the rest of the world of 50 series stock, and they may be redirecting their 40 series stock elsewhere. I have absolutely no leaks or proof of or anything of that. I'm just purely speculating. Okay, that's all I'm doing. So it would make sense to me if I'm running a business like that and I want to make sure that I'm maximizing my sales across the world. If I was trying to dodge tariffs, now, as it turns out, I don't think Donald Trump is going to put all these tariffs that were feared. Well, maybe he will. If I was a business and I was answerable to my shareholders, I would be stockpiling where there was the greatest risk of tariffs being added. I would put as many 50, 80s and 90s and so on into the US. I would give a token few around the world just to make sure that we had that paper launch. And if I had 40 series stock in the US, or I had that they're over in wherever, China or Taiwan, wherever they put the PCBs together for the chips. It's the AIBs do the PCBs, whether it's reference or custom or whatever. I would, if I was running that business, I would be sending my 40 series stock, whatever's left, okay, because they may not be making new ones, but I'm sure they have stock yet to send out. Okay, I would be sending that out to the rest of the world, including the European Union. So another thing that makes me think that may be the case is this Inno3D. This is the one I actually bought. It's not the most expensive model. Okay, it's like based on the reference design I expect. It does have a factory overclock, which would add an extra maybe €30 onto the price or something like that, but I still got it for $1,079 plus shipping. If you look at the date, this is October, so they announced a brand new model of a 4080 Super in October. Okay, Inno3D, not particularly well known in the US. They certainly would be in Europe. Okay, maybe Europe is their main market. So why would you launch a brand new model in October? And if you look on the page here, if we scroll down to that particular model that I bought, you can see it's gone up in price. This morning when I looked, there were 3 pieces left. Now there's only 2. Okay, so what's going on there? Are people like me getting wind of maybe a lack of improvement in the 50 series, and they're saying, I'm going to get maybe 10-15% improvement, but I might, because of availability, maybe I'll have to spend 30-40% more than the MSRP, maybe even 50% more. Doesn't make sense. MFG, can't use it. My refresh rate doesn't allow it. I'm going to bag myself a 4080 Super. Happy days, I can do my 4K gaming. I've been waiting for an upgrade for so long. I'm looking at the 5080. I'm very underwhelmed by what I see, so I'm getting the 4080 Super. It's exactly how I felt. That's what I did. I was kind of hedging. Okay, what if all these 4080 Supers sell out like they have in the US, and they're now selling for €1,500 plus? Okay, so I thought it was a good deal. I could be wrong. I took a little gamble. I think it'll pay off, but who knows? Okay, but this is starting to sell out. When I saw it first, there was no limit. There was no amount of it didn't say only whatever number of pieces. That wasn't there, that message. It was 3 this morning, and there's another one been sold since, so it's selling out. But there are other models that are below what you would call below MSRP. These are all slightly below MSRP. Some above. That's around the MSRP. Okay, but as you can see, there is availability. There's a lot of availability, I would guess. And if you go to other European-based e-tailers, they don't have 4080 Supers, so I don't think you can go to Case King, which is another major competitor of Computer Universe based in Germany as well. They don't have any 4080 Supers, so it's possible that is this NVIDIA saying, okay, Computer Universe, you're our main supplier of 4080 Supers. Again, I'm speculating, but if you go to Case King, another huge supplier in the EU, they don't just sell to Germany, they sell across Europe into Ireland in my case. So they're a great option when it comes to doing a new build. But if I search for 4080 Super, in fact, why don't I go to components, graphics cards, 4000 series, 4080 Super, zero availability, nothing. Okay, nothing. So why Computer Universe? Unless NVIDIA has said, okay, we're gonna dump the rest of our 40 series stuff. We're gonna concentrate it all. Just gonna deal with Computer Universe, and they can sell all of our stuff at or below MSRP. Okay, so again, speculation, but I'm only reading what I can see, reading the tea leaves. So that's that. Final point. Again, I've gone way over what I expected to do. Okay, it's my first video on this channel, so I'm sure I'll get better at being a bit more concise in the future. And do like the video, do subscribe. I will have more content like this, stuff on performance, GPU performance, benchmarks, more general kind of educational stuff around the graphics pipeline and so on. There could be some interesting stuff in there, game development stuff, game design, interesting things I see in games, whether it's to do with graphics or game mechanics or whatever. There's going to be lots of content like that, I hope, in the future. So do subscribe. I'm sure it'll be worth your while in the long run. So all of these fancy new features like mega geometry, neural rendering and so on, are these another reason to go for the 5080 and spend a bit more? Probably not. What are we going to get? We're going to get tech demos. We're going to see Cyberpunk. We're going to see Alan Wake, the partners of NVIDIA, who NVIDIA, they go in, they give these companies free training and free advertising. Okay, lots of marketing. So we see YouTube videos where NVIDIA are showing off Cyberpunk 2077 in particular, but also games like Alan Wake 2 and what's that game, Black State or whatever, that new game with the fancy marble reflections and so on. So they get lots of marketing out of that. They also get technical help, they get training and so on these new technologies without having to fork out any cash. So it's kind of a win-win in both cases. But apart from those, I don't see a lot of games, considering that games take 3, 4, 5, even up to 8 or 9 years to develop. I don't see a lot of neural rendering stuff coming out in the near term, apart from those NVIDIA sponsored titles. Will it save a lot of VRAM to the point where 8 gigabytes becomes viable? I doubt it. It might help you in some edge cases with 12 gigabytes. So for example, in the Indiana Jones game, which again has ties to NVIDIA, on a 4070 Ti with its 12 gigabytes, when you turn on the path tracing, 12 gigabytes is very, very much on the edge. In fact, it's so on the edge you can't turn on frame generation. There just isn't the VRAM overhead. So maybe if they put in neural rendering there, save a bit of VRAM, more savings with frame generation, maybe games like that are on the edge could benefit. But apart from that, I don't think there's going to be too many of those cases. I think this is going to be a feature that's going to, a bit like the 20 series with ray tracing. I think it's the next generation when you'll start seeing games come out and the technology improve and so on. Okay, that was, what are we, 3/4 an hour? Way too long. Hope you enjoyed the video, and hopefully if you've subscribed, click that bell, liked and so on. Comment down below, I love to see your comments. And with that, that's the end of the video, and I'll see you hopefully in the next one.